My wife started defending her coworker instead of me, working late nights, and letting a stranger make decisions about our family ranch. I was too busy working 18-hour days to realize that while I was building our future, she was planning her escape. When I finally caught them together, our 23-year marriage was over. But the real story, how a betrayed rancher and his 3 kids built something even stronger from the ashes. My name is Dalton Hayes. I'm 47 years old, and I've been running Hayes Family Ranch for the past 15 years. My daddy started this operation back in 1987 with nothing but a dream and a loan that nearly broke us twice. When he passed, he left me 800 acres of prime Texas grassland, 200 head of black Angus cattle, a mortgage that keeps me up at night. I married Marlene Porter 23 years ago, back when she was a bright-eyed college graduate with big city dreams, and I was a young cowboy who thought love could conquer anything. We had Pierce when we were both 26. He's 20 now and supposed to be learning the family business, though lately he seems more interested in hanging around town with his buddies than mucking stalls. Then came Anita at 28. She's 18 now, sharp as a tack, headed to college in the fall with grades that made me proud enough to burst. The surprise came 12 years later. Indy. Marlene didn't want another baby, said we were too old, too tired, too stretched thin already. But sometimes life has other plans. Indy's 10 now, and while Marlene still carries guilt about not wanting her initially, that little girl is the sunshine in our house. She's got my stubborn streak and her mama's quick wit. 3 years ago, when beef prices dropped and we nearly lost everything, Marlene took a job at the County Agricultural Extension Office. Said she wanted to help, to contribute more than just keeping the books. I was grateful, honestly. The extra income meant we could keep Anita's college fund intact, and maybe even fix the barn roof that's been leaking since last spring. That's where she met Quinton Mills. He's the new agricultural specialist they brought in from Austin. Younger guy, probably 39, with fancy degrees and ideas about sustainable farming that sound real impressive when he talks. Marlene started mentioning him at dinner. Quinton says this, Quinton thinks that. At first, I figured it was just work talk. New colleague, fresh perspective, nothing more. I should have trusted my gut when it started churning every time his name came up. Should have paid attention when Marlene began working late nights on special projects. Should have noticed how she started dressing nicer for work, how she'd check her phone during dinner and smile at messages she never shared. But I was busy, always busy. Calving season, hay season, dealing with a sick bull that cost us $3,000 in vet bills. The ranch demands everything you've got and then asks for more. By the time I looked up from my work long enough to really see what was happening in my own house, the foundation had already started shifting beneath our feet. Marlene used to look at me like I hung the moon. These days, she looks at me like I'm just another problem that needs solving. The trouble started on a Thursday morning in late February. I was out checking the north pasture fence when my phone buzzed with a text from Marlene. She was supposed to be at work, but the message said she'd be home late because Quinton was taking her to some agricultural conference in San Antonio. Just the two of them. Something about that didn't sit right. I've been to plenty of conferences over the years, and they usually sent whole teams, not just 2 people. But when I called her office, her secretary said Marlene had already left for the day. I finished fixing the fence and drove back to the house, my mind churning like a hay baler with a bent blade. Anita was in the kitchen, making herself a sandwich, still in her school clothes. "Dad, you look like someone stole your favorite horse," Anita said, looking up from her sandwich. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart. Where's your sister?" I asked, hanging my hat on the hook by the door. "Indy's upstairs doing homework. Mom called and said she won't be back until tomorrow night. Some work thing in San Antonio." Tomorrow night? That was news to me. Marlene's text had just said late, not overnight. Yeah, she sounded excited about it. Said it was a big opportunity. I nodded and grabbed a beer from the fridge. Tried to keep my expression neutral. Anita was smart. Too smart not to notice when something was off. The last thing our family needed was the kids worrying about grown-up problems. That evening, I tried calling Marlene around 8. Straight to voicemail. Tried again at 10. Same thing. By midnight, I was pacing the living room like a caged animal, inventing scenarios that range from innocent to devastating. She finally called back the next morning while I was feeding the cattle. "Dalton, I'm sorry I missed your calls," Marlene said, her voice bright and cheerful. too cheerful. The conference ran really late, and then we all went to dinner. I didn't want to wake you. We all? I asked, leaning against the fence post. The conference attendees. You know how these networking things go. But I didn't know, because I'd never been to one where my wife stayed overnight without telling me first. When will you be home? I asked. This afternoon. Quinton wants to show me this innovative ranch operation on the way back. It might give us ideas for improving our own setup. Our setup. Since when did Quinton Mills have any say in how I ran my family's ranch? I'll see you when you get here, I said, and hung up before I said something I'd regret. But standing there in my pasture, watching my cattle graze on land my father had died to keep, I felt something shift inside my chest. Like a fault line that had been holding steady for years suddenly decided to move. I didn't know it then, but that phone call was the beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew about my life. When Marlene came home that Friday evening, she looked different. Her hair was styled in a way I hadn't seen before, and she was wearing makeup, actual makeup, on a regular weekday. She kissed my cheek like she always did, but it felt rehearsed, like she was playing a role. How was the conference? I asked, watching her set down her purse with unusual care. Oh, it was incredible, Dalton. You should have seen the technology they're using. Quinton thinks we could implement some of these sustainable practices here on the ranch. There it was again. Quinton thinks. Not we learned, or the conference showed. Everything filtered through him. What kind of practices? I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. Marlene launched into a detailed explanation about rotational grazing systems and soil health monitoring. Things I'd been doing for 15 years, but apparently needed a fancy agricultural specialist to validate. As she talked, her eyes lit up in a way they hadn't when discussing the ranch in months. Quinton wants to come out next week to assess our current setup, she said, pulling plates from a cabinet. He thinks he could help us increase our efficiency by 20%. Does he now? I kept my voice level, but inside, my jaw was clenching like a vice. And what does this assessment cost? Nothing, Marlene said quickly. He's doing it as a favor. He's really passionate about helping local ranchers succeed. I bet he is, I thought, watching my wife of 23 years glow while talking about another man's passion. That weekend, Pierce came home from his latest adventure with his buddies, reeking of cheap beer and bad decisions. I found him sleeping in his truck in our driveway Saturday morning, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. Pierce Alexander Hayes, I said, banging on his window. Get your sorry behind out of that truck and into this house. He stumbled out, squinting in the morning sun like a raccoon caught in headlights. Dad, I can explain. Save it, I said, steering him toward the house. You're 20 years old, son. Time to start acting like it. Inside, Marlene was making coffee, humming some tune I didn't recognize. She looked at Pierce with disappointment, but not surprise. Pierce, we've talked about this, Marlene said. You can't keep running around with those boys, getting into trouble. What trouble? Pierce asked, slumping into a kitchen chair. We were just having fun. Fun doesn't pay the bills, I said, sitting across from him. And it sure doesn't prepare you to take over this ranch someday. Pierce snorted. Who says I want to take over the ranch? The words hit me like a physical blow. For generations of Hayes men had worked this land, and my son was dismissing it like it was nothing. This ranch is your heritage, I said, keeping my voice steady. Your great-grandfather started with nothing and built something lasting. Maybe I want to build something different. Pierce shot back. Maybe I don't want to spend my life covered in mud and manure. Marlene touched my arm gently. Dalton, let him find his own way. But I could see in her eyes that she agreed with him, that maybe she thought our way of life wasn't good enough anymore either. Tuesday morning came too fast. I was moving cattle from the south pasture when I saw a silver sedan pull into our driveway. Quinton Mills stepped out wearing khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my work boots. He looked around our ranch like he was surveying a kingdom he planned to inherit. Marlene practically ran out of the house to greet him. From where I stood, I could see them shaking hands, then talking animatedly while pointing toward different sections of our land. She was laughing at something he said, touching his arm like they were old friends instead of professional colleagues. I finished with the cattle and walked over, my boots heavy on the gravel. You must be Dalton, Quinton said, extending his hand with a smile that felt practiced. I've heard so much about you. Wish I could say the same. I replied, shaking his hand with enough pressure to let him know I wasn't some pushover rancher he could sweet talk. Quinton was just telling me about this innovative fencing system they're using in Austin, Marlene said, her voice bright with enthusiasm. It could save us thousands in maintenance costs. Our fencing works just fine, I said, looking directly at Quinton. Been keeping cattle in and predators out for 15 years. Oh, I'm sure it does, Quinton said with that same practice smile. But there's always room for improvement, right? Marlene mentioned you're dealing with some financial pressures. Modern solutions might help maximize your profit margins. The fact that my wife had discussed our private financial situation with this stranger made my blood pressure spike. But I kept my expression neutral. Marlene, why don't you show Quinton around while I finish my morning work, I said. I'm sure he's got better places to be than listening to an old rancher's opinions. Actually, Quinton said, I'd love to hear your perspective on sustainable grazing practices. Marlene says you have some interesting theories about soil regeneration. The way he said theories made it sound like I was some amateur playing with ideas instead of a man who'd been working this land since before he finished college. They're not theories, I said. They're 26 years of experience. Marlene shot me a warning look. Dalton, Quinton's just trying to help. And there it was. She took her coworker's side over mine, and that's when I said the words that changed everything. My wife defending another man's intentions while dismissing my expertise on my own land. I felt something fundamental shift in my chest, like a dam holding back years of frustration, suddenly developing hairline fractures. Help with what exactly? I asked, my voice dropping lower. Help improve a ranch that's been profitable for 3 generations? Help fix problems that don't exist? Or help my wife feel like her husband doesn't know what he's doing? Dalton. Marlene's face flushed red. You're being completely unreasonable. Am I? I looked directly at her, then at Quinton, who was suddenly very interested in his shoes. Because from where I stand, it looks like you two have been making plans for my ranch without bothering to include me in the conversation. Quinton cleared his throat. Maybe I should come back another time when... No, I said firmly. You should leave. Now. Marlene's mouth fell open. You can't just... This is my ranch, I said, my voice carrying across the yard with the kind of authority that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. My land, my cattle, my rules. And I don't need some city boy with a fancy degree telling me how to run while my family build. Quinton was already backing toward his car, hands raised in surrender. I'll call you later, Marlene. As the sedan disappeared down our driveway, I turned to face my wife. She was staring at me like I'd just committed an unforgivable sin. That was embarrassing, she said quietly. No, I replied. What's embarrassing is having to defend my own expertise to a stranger in my own driveway. The tension in our house was thick as molasses after the confrontation with Quinton. Marlene barely spoke to me for 3 days, moving through our home like a ghost haunted by resentment. When she did talk, it was about practical things, groceries, bills, Anita's college applications. Thursday evening, I was in the barn checking on our pregnant heifer when I heard voices from the house. Through the kitchen window, I could see Marlene on the phone, pacing back and forth with more animation than she'd shown me all week. I know, she was saying. He was completely out of line. I'm so embarrassed. I didn't need to guess who she was talking to. When I came inside an hour later, Anita was sitting at the kitchen table with her homework spread out like a war zone. She looked up at me with those serious eyes that reminded me of my own mother. Dad, are you and Mom okay? Anita asked quietly. Why do you ask, sweetheart? Because she's been crying when she thinks nobody's looking. And you've been working in the barn until after dark every night this week. Smart girl. Too smart for her own good sometimes. Adults go through rough patches, Anita. It doesn't mean anything's broken permanently. But even as I said it, I wondered if I was lying to both of us. That weekend, Pierce surprised me by showing up sober and asking if I needed help with the fence repairs in the east pasture. We worked side by side for most of Saturday morning, the familiar rhythm of physical labor creating a space where words came easier. Mom's mad at you, Pierce said, stretching new wire between posts. I noticed. She thinks you don't respect her job. I stopped hammering and looked at my son. What do you think? Pierce was quiet for a long moment, testing the tension on the wire. I think you respect Mom plenty. I also think you don't like that guy Quinton very much. No, I don't. Because he's trying to change how we do things here. Because he's trying to change your mother. I pulled the wire tight and secured it with a staple. And she's letting him. Pierce nodded like he understood something he'd been puzzling over. Dad, what if I'm not cut out for ranching? The question hung between us like morning fog. I'd been dreading it and expecting it in equal measure. Then you find what you were cut out for, I said finally. But you don't run from responsibility while you're figuring it out. A man faces his obligations, even when he's planning to move beyond them. Is that what you did? No, I admitted. I was lucky enough to love what I inherited. But your great-grandfather didn't start this ranch, so his descendants would be trapped by it. He started it so they'd have choices. For the first time in months, Pierce smiled at me like I was more than just the guy who paid the bills and laid down the rules. That evening, Marlene announced she'd be working late again. Something about a special project that required weekend hours. I didn't ask questions, but I also didn't pretend to believe her anymore. Saturday morning, Indy came running into the kitchen while I was making coffee, her face bright with excitement. Daddy, can we go see the new calves today? She asked, bouncing on her toes. Sure thing, princess. Right after breakfast. Marlene emerged from the bedroom dressed in clothes I'd never seen before, a flowing dress that looked more suited for a wine bar than a ranch. She moved through the kitchen with purpose, grabbing her purse and keys. Where are you headed? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. The office, Marlene said without looking at me. That special project I mentioned. On Saturday. Agriculture doesn't take weekends off, Dalton. You should know that. But something about her answer felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. After she left, I spent the morning with Indy, showing her the 3 new calves that had been born this week. She named them all, Buttercup, Daisy, and Trouble, and made me promise to remember which was which. Daddy, why doesn't Mommy like the ranch anymore? Indy asked as we walked back toward the house. The question hit me harder than I expected. What makes you think she doesn't like it? She used to come out here with us. She used to help name the calves and take pictures. Now she just talks about work all the time. Out of the mouths of babes. My 10-year-old daughter had noticed what I'd been trying to deny for months. People change sometimes, sweetheart. It doesn't mean they love us any less. But as I said it, I realized I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. That afternoon, I drove into town to pick up feed from the supply store. As I was loading 50-pound bags into my truck, I saw a familiar silver sedan parked outside the coffee shop on Main Street. Through the window, I could see Marlene sitting across from Quinton, both of them leaning forward like they were sharing secrets. I finished loading the feed and sat in my truck for a few minutes, watching them. They looked comfortable together. Natural, the way Marlene and I used to look when we were dating. My phone buzzed with a text from Marlene, working later than expected. Don't wait up. I looked through the coffee shop window again. She was laughing at something Quinton said, her hand resting on the table inches from his. I drove home slowly, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to leave marks. When I got there, I found my mother-in-law Joanna's car in the driveway. She was sitting on the porch with Anita, both of them drinking sweet tea and looking serious. Dalton, Joanna said as I walked up the steps. We need to talk. The tone in her voice told me she already knew more than I wanted her to. Joanna Porter had never been one to sugarcoat things, and the look in her eyes said she wasn't about to start now. Anita, honey, why don't you go check on Indy? Joanna said. After Anita disappeared inside, Joanna fixed me with a stare that could have stopped a charging bull. My daughter's making a fool of herself, she said bluntly. And if you don't do something about it soon, she's going to destroy this family. Joanna Porter was the kind of woman who could read a situation like a weather forecast and tell you exactly when the storm was coming. She'd raised Marlene to be stronger than this, and seeing her daughter throw away a good marriage for some smooth-talking city boy had lit a fire in her that could have melted steel. How long have you known? I asked, settling into the porch chair across from her. About 3 weeks, Joanna said, her voice sharp with disapproval. I saw them together at that new restaurant downtown. The way they were looking at each other, touching hands across the table, it wasn't professional. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Did you talk to her about it? I tried. She got defensive, said I was imagining things. Told me Quinton was just helping her develop new skills for her career. Joanna snorted. The only skill he's developing is how to wreck a 23-year marriage. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the pasture where my cattle grazed peacefully, oblivious to the human drama unfolding around them. "Dalton, I need you to know something," Joanna said finally. "Whatever happens between you and Marlene, those 3 kids need stability. Anita's got college applications to finish. Pierce needs to figure out his life. And Indy." She paused, her voice softening. "That little girl adores you. Don't let Marlene's poor choices cost those children their father." "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. "This ranch is their heritage. I won't let anyone take that away from them." "Good. Because I'll be damned if I let some Austin hotshot destroy what 4 generations of your family built." That evening, when Marlene finally came home around 10 o'clock, she found me in the kitchen going over the ranch's financial records. I've been putting off this conversation for weeks, but Joanna's visit had given me the clarity I needed. "We need to talk," I said without looking up from the ledger. "Dalton, I'm tired. Can this wait until tomorrow?" "No." I closed the book and looked directly at her. "Your mother stopped by today." Marlene's face went white. "What did she want?" "To warn me about what you're doing. To tell me that I need to protect our children from watching their mother destroy this family." "She had no right." "She had every right," I interrupted. "She's their grandmother. She loves them. And she's watching their mother make choices that are going to scar them for life." Marlene sat down across from me, her hands trembling slightly. "I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen. And now we have to decide what comes next." "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, my voice steady and controlled. "I mean, you have a choice to make, Marlene. You can end whatever this is with Quinton and try to rebuild what we had. Or you can continue down this path and lose everything that actually matters. You're giving me an ultimatum. I'm giving you a chance to remember who you used to be before he filled your head with fantasies about a different life." Marlene stared at the table for a long moment. When she finally looked up, I could see the answer in her eyes before she spoke. "I need time to think." "Take all the time you need," I said, standing up from the table. "But while you're thinking, remember that your children are watching, and they'll remember what you choose." 3 days later, Marlene made her choice. I found her in our bedroom packing a suitcase, moving with the mechanical precision of someone who'd already detached emotionally from what they were leaving behind. "Going somewhere?" I asked from the doorway. "Quinton got offered a position in Dallas," she said without looking at me. "He wants you to come with him. Start fresh." "What about your job here?" "There are agricultural extension offices in Dallas. Better opportunities." "What about your children?" That made her pause. She stood there holding a dress she'd worn to our anniversary dinner 2 years ago, and for a moment I thought maybe she'd remember what she was throwing away. "They'll understand eventually," she said finally. "When they're older, they'll see that sometimes people have to choose happiness over obligation." "Is that what you think this family is? An obligation?" "Dalton, please don't make this harder than it has to be." I stepped into the room, my boots heavy on the hardwood floor. "You're walking out on 3 kids who love you. Pierce is finally starting to get his act together. Anita's stressed about college, and Indy still believes her mommy hung the moon. But you're choosing a man you've known for 6 months over the family you've built for 23 years. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice rising. "You're having a midlife crisis, and you're burning down everything good in your life to chase some fantasy that makes you feel young again." Marlene's face flushed red. "It's not a fantasy. Quinton sees my potential. He believes in me. I believed in you too. For 23 years. I supported every dream you had, every goal you set. The difference is, I did it while also building a life with you, not asking you to abandon everything you claim to love." She zipped up the suitcase with violent force. "I've made my decision." "Then make a clean break," I said, stepping aside to let her pass. "Don't string the kids along with promises to visit. Don't call on their birthdays pretending you're still their mother. If you're choosing him over them, then choose completely." Marlene stopped in the doorway, her face pale. "You can't keep me from seeing my children." "I can't. But I won't let you pop in and out of their lives whenever guilt or loneliness strikes you. Either you're their mother or you're not. Either this family matters to you or it doesn't. There's no middle ground." She walked out without another word. I heard her talking quietly to the kids in the living room, making promises I knew she wouldn't keep about staying in touch and visiting soon. Indy was crying. Anita was silent. Pierce was asking questions Marlene couldn't answer honestly. 20 minutes later, I watched through the kitchen window as Quinton's silver sedan pulled out of our driveway with my wife in the passenger seat. She didn't look back at the house. Not once. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence that had settled over our home like dust after a tornado. Then I walked outside to check on the cattle, because life on a ranch doesn't stop for heartbreak, and my children were going to need the stability that only comes from a man who keeps his word and shows up every day, no matter what. 6 months after Marlene left, our ranch had found its rhythm again. Pierce surprised everyone by throwing himself into ranch work with a dedication I hadn't seen since he was a kid. He'd cut ties with his troublemaker friends and started talking about maybe taking some agricultural business classes at the community college. "Dad, I've been thinking," Pierce said one morning as we moved cattle to fresh pasture. "What if we expanded into organic beef? There's a growing market for it." "That's not a bad idea," I said, genuinely impressed. "Why don't you research it and put together a proposal?" Really, this ranch will be yours someday if you want it. Might as well start learning to think like an owner." Anita got early acceptance to Texas A&M with a partial scholarship. She'd grown more serious since her mother left, but also more determined. She still helped with Indy's homework every evening and took on cooking duties 2 nights a week without being asked. Indy had the hardest time adjusting. She'd ask when Mommy was coming home for the first few months until I finally sat her down and explained that sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt the people they love. But that doesn't mean it's anyone's fault. "Do you miss her, Daddy?" Indy asked one evening as I tucked her into bed. "Sometimes," I said honestly, "but I'm grateful every day for you, Pierce and Anita. You 3 are the best things your mother and I ever did together. Even if she doesn't come back. Especially if she doesn't come back. Because that means we get to keep being our own kind of family." Joanna visited every Sunday, usually bringing homemade pies and stories that made Indy laugh. She never mentioned Marlene unless one of the kids asked, and even then, she kept her comments neutral. "You're doing good work here, Dalton," she told me one afternoon as we watched Pierce teach Indy how to rope fence posts. "These kids are going to be just fine. They're stronger than I expected. They get that from you." That evening, I got a call from a lawyer in Dallas. Marlene wanted to discuss divorce terms and custody arrangements. She was willing to give me full custody if I didn't pursue alimony or claim on her future earnings. "She's essentially walking away from everything," the lawyer explained. "The ranch, the kids, any claim to marital assets. In exchange, she wants a clean break with minimal financial obligation." I looked around our kitchen, where Anita was helping Indy with a school project, while Pierce read over some agricultural journals I bought him. "Tell her we have a deal," I said. The next chapter of our lives could finally begin. 2 years later, Hayes Ranch was thriving like it hadn't in decades. Pierce's organic beef program had not only increased our profit margins, but connected us with restaurants and farmers markets throughout Central Texas. He'd married his college girlfriend, Sarah, a veterinary student who fit into our family like she'd always belonged. Anita was a junior at A&M, studying agricultural business and animal science. She came home every few weeks with new ideas about sustainable ranching and financial planning that kept us ahead of the curve. She'd also started dating a young man from a neighboring ranch, someone who understood that marrying into the Hayes family meant marrying into the land itself. Indy, now 12, was showing more interest in the cattle than either of her older siblings ever had. She could spot a sick calf from across the pasture and had memorized the lineage of every bull we owned. She also helped me keep the books, showing ahead for numbers that reminded me of my grandmother. "Daddy, Mrs. Patterson wants to know if we can supply beef for her restaurant's grand opening," Indy said, coming into the kitchen with mud on her boots and a smile on her face. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd check with the boss," she said with a grin. "Smart girl. What do you think?" "I think we can handle it, but we should charge premium prices. She's going to make a lot of money off our reputation." "That's my daughter." Marlene had remarried 6 months ago. Quinton's position in Dallas hadn't worked out the way they'd hoped, and they'd moved to Colorado where he had family. She sent Christmas cards with pictures of their new life, but never called. The kids had stopped asking about her, and I'd stopped expecting her to remember their birthdays. On a warm spring evening, I stood on our front porch watching Pierce and Sarah work with a young horse in the corral while Indy practiced her roping technique nearby. Anita was on the phone with a potential buyer, negotiating with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what our beef was worth. Joanna pulled up in her truck, carrying what looked like another one of her famous peach cobblers. "How's the most successful rancher in 3 counties?" she called out. "Getting by," I said, but I was smiling. "More than getting by, from what I hear. Piers told me y'all are thinking about expanding into the Peterson place. Maybe, if the price is right." She climbed the porch steps and settled into her usual chair. "You know, I always wondered if Marlene appreciated what she had here. Now I know she didn't." "Her loss," I said, and meant it. "Her loss, your gain. These kids turned out exactly like they should have." As the sun set over our pastures, I realized Joanna was right. Marlene's betrayal had nearly destroyed us, but in the end, it had revealed who we really were underneath. We were the Hayes family, and we were exactly where we belonged. We'd not only survived, we'd thrived.